talk about this. What's a database in the era of the data lakehouse? So a little bit of an introduction. I am Ben. I am from wrong button. I am from Mode. So Mode is a BI tool for like data analysts and stuff. It looks like this. It's a place you can write SQL queries and do analysis. There are also some charts. You can make things like this. And I also like kind of yell at the internet here. It's kind of the general vibe of this whole situation. Recently, also, as was mentioned, Mode was acquired by ThoughtSpot like 6 months ago. ThoughtSpot is also a BI tool. It's a BI tool where you can write fancy natural language questions and get answers, and you can see in the search bar, and it's cool, and you can check it out. In addition to that, when Mode got acquired, I went from being Mode's CTO to ThoughtSpot's field CTO. I don't really know what that means, but this is, I'm out in the field with all of y'all. Okay, so, but for the purposes of this talk, I'm trying to answer this question. I'm not really trying to answer the question as like a data vendor or as a technical person. I'm trying to answer it basically as the other way that I kind of identify, which is as an analyst. So I started all of this data stuff basically as an analyst or data scientist or whatever. Shout out to that show in New York where this card is from. And so what I mean by this is like my job is to answer questions and share stuff with executives. So I am essentially like the Jonah Hill in this Moneyball bit where I do analysis and then present them to executives about making decisions. That means I do a lot of things like writing SQL queries. These are big, long SQL queries. This is an example of one that was from a long time ago. I care a lot about things like SQL formatting. This is, again, the vibe of that whole blog. Make a lot of charts, make charts about SQL formatting, ask a lot of questions like why and obnoxious things that executives don't like. And periodically we'll attempt to do engineering things, but it doesn't go well. And so this is kind of like the perspective of this question is not as an engineer, not as like a vendor again, but as an analyst who thinks about databases as a thing to use to do analysis. So specifically, that means two things when trying to answer this question of like, what is a database? I do not care about like this part of a database. So people use databases for production applications. This was a blog post from Notion from a while back. They were like trying to figure out how to use Postgres as their backend to the application. I don't care about this kind of database. If you're using databases for like running production applications, great. That is not why we are here today. Again, we're like writing SQL queries in the dark, trying to answer questions for executives. The other thing I don't care about really is like the technical definition of a database. I am sure there is some standard out there that like, this is what a database is, that Oracle says it has to be this. I don't really care about that. Like whatever the technical official definition is, whatever, we are not going to have fights like this where it's like Kafka is not a database because it doesn't meet this exact standard. Okay, fine. This is not Frankenstein. It is Frankenstein's monster, but we all know that there's actually Frankenstein. So I care about databases in this way. Like when we talk about databases, we're talking about like Frankenstein. We all know what we mean. So what that means is I like want to know what happens in this case. Say your boss and me as an analyst get asked the question, I think we should be investing in a new database. My first question I'm going to say is like, why? And then my second question is going to be like, what do you mean by a database? What do we actually need to do that? And I'm going to think through the various requirements of like, what is a database and what things do we need to buy and all that kind of stuff to solve the problem that my boss is asking for when they say we need a new database or need to upgrade our database system or whatever. And so this is kind of the, the RFP essentially in my head of what I'm trying to solve here. And so in order to do this, I wouldn't actually go like look up technical definitions of a database or whatever. I basically would just like consult my friends and try to figure out what they think a database is and what is it that everybody says or means when they say database. And so that's really the question I want to answer here is like, when we think of a database, what are we actually thinking of? And so the real title of this talk should be something like this, which is like, what do databases and other analytical database buyers expect from the products they buy in the era of the data lakehouse? But that is a lousy title for a talk. And so we went with the other thing. To answer this question, I think like a useful place to start is where databases used to be. So rather than now, like what did these people want in the era of, I don't know why the old database, but whatever. What do we think of like databases way back when, before we had all this like fancy stuff that we have now? And so that very roughly looked something kind of like this. So a database then was, we've got someone who's asking for data, writing a SQL query. In this case, again, Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill is going to write a SQL query. He's going to use something like Postgres, which is just a database enthusiast's database. The query is going to compile inside of Postgres, like the Postgres application will actually compile the query. There will be kind of a computer inside of that thing that does some computation. It's like a calculator. it will fetch a bunch of tables that live inside of that same thing. So there are tables that exist inside of Postgres. The computer will apply some calculations to that. It will spit out a result, and it'll send it back to me, and I will be Jonah Hill, and I'll be very happy. And so this is a database. This certainly is, 20 years ago, we'd all agree, yeah, Postgres, definitely a database. It's kind of right there in the name. But a lot of things have changed since then. So some of the things that have happened since we had this was, one, we made the tables real big. So things like Vertica or other like columnar stores came along and said, hey, we could do really, really big tables. So that's slightly different, but still like pretty clearly a database. Redshift said, what if we stick this whole thing in the cloud? Which great, we do that now. It's kind of an obnoxious icon, so we're going to make it square again. So other things, like we still pretty clearly Redshift database, but then really interesting things started to happen. So Snowflake said, hey, what if we take this calculator and these tables and we split them apart? So now we have like a calculator and some tables that are separate. You can separate storage and compute. We all kind of know what that means. But things are starting to like look a little bit different now. Snowflake did some other things. They're like, hey, actually, what if we start querying stuff that's not inside of the database? Like tables used to be in Snowflake. Now you can actually kind of query stuff that's not in Snowflake at all. It can be wherever, S3 or other various locations on the internet. So still kind of a database, but then even like weirder stuff started to happen. So folks like Starburst said, hey, we can actually sort of pull out the entire tables altogether and just be a compute engine. Dremio, who we also heard from a bit ago, basically similar idea. We can start making like the compute and storage completely separate products and vendors. So we end up in a world that sort of looks like this, where actually all of the files live kind of outside of the database, and the database or whatever the thing is now that's kind of this slowly shrinking blue box is just the compute engine and kind of the results. Databricks and Snowflake also now can kind of support this stuff. So we now have a lot of people who do these sorts of things. And this has now become known as the Lakehouse. Shout out to the Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves movie. Underrated rom-com about a time-traveling mailbox. So this is where we were. And now like even crazier stuff has started to happen. So if folks use DBT said, hey, like what if we also do some kind of query compilation ourselves? DBT should know about metrics. What that means is you can now not just use DBT for data transformation. You can kind of like write sort of pseudo queries against DBT. DBT will take that thing on the left or something kind of like it and turn it into this thing on the right, which is a SQL query. And then it will hand the SQL query to your database. And so now we've injected this other step where there's already like some additional pre-compilation prior to the Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves step of like business logic. And DBT isn't the only one who does this. There's a handful of other tools that build similar sorts of semantic layers that do some kind of like pre-compilation of queries prior to actually things getting handed off to the compute engine. So there are some other things too that have happened here. So there are folks like Mode and other BI tools that have also injected a kind of post-computation layer that happens after the result gets returned. In Tableau, for instance, you can create calculated fields and all these other things, and these things get applied to the result. And there are additional places for business logic. So that kind of happens pre-fired up Jonah Hill down there on the end. Again, we've added some more stuff too. So there are tools now like Tabular, which are kind of this weird intermediate step that aren't actually the computation layer. That's the stuff down at the bottom. They're not actually the storage layer, which is the thing at the top, but this kind of mapping of like, how do we actually apply the computation to these raw tables? It's essentially like the relational database management system minus all of the parts we would traditionally think of as a database. And so that's kind of gotten injected here between the computer thing and the files part down there. So we now have this part where we started to pull this out. And so we also now have like data off in the field. Like, where does all this data come from? The field being like production. It's where we all are. It's us using our apps and devices and various things. It's also where I live now. And so there's additional computation that happens prior to that. So this is kind of what Upsolver does, where you add additional business logic and transformation and things that a database has traditionally done prior to collecting the data and dumping it into your S3 file, which is sort of a database, but not really. So you have all these things that are like kind of databases, but not entirely. And we've gotten even weirder more recently. So Snowflake is a database, I guess. But you can also build apps directly in the thing now. It's also kind of an app hosting platform. There are tools like Databricks that you can also run a bunch of crazy AI and ML models and build your own LLMs and various fancy things in Databricks. BigQuery has a bunch of APIs, so you can kind of use it as like a application backend in some ways, and it starts to not just compile SQL queries, but has like actual APIs into it. Snowflake and other folks are also trying to combine the transactional stuff with the analytical stuff. So we actually can do this stuff too. If you want to use it for building applications, we can do all of that. So it's all got very complicated. And so the question is like, where's the database in all this? We have this crazy complicated diagram. What does a database mean in this world that isn't just Postgres, but is this diagram of all these other places, like business logic lives in 1,000 different spots and things like that. So I think there's a couple ways you can answer this question. I have no answer to this question, by the way. This question, the title of this talk has a question mark at the end because I don't know. But I think there's a couple ways you can think about it. And so one is define it by a specific thing it does. Like when we say a database, we may mean a very specific thing. So if we look at this like diagram of all this various craziness, we can say actually, okay, there's a handful of things here that are pretty consistent that you need to do. Like a database may be one of these things. It may be where business logic lives. Like a database may be the place where we actually store all this kind of logic. To get rid of the Lakehouse folks for a sec. It may be where we actually compile SQL queries. So it's the thing that takes like a query and compiles it into something that can actually be run against a computer. It may be the place where that computation actually happens. It may be the thing where like metadata is mapped between computation and the actual storage of the files. Maybe it's where the storage lives. Maybe it's where like results get delivered. Like all of these things could be the defining feature of a database. I don't know. One thing I guess we can probably say somewhat confidently is a database is not this. Upsolver is probably not a database. It's probably not the thing where like data is ingested. You could maybe make that argument. Probably not that. It's also probably not this. It's probably not the place where data is visualized. Though again, you could kind of make an argument that that is because like there is a lot of data stored there. It is where results are also delivered, but probably not. But still, we end up with these 6 things of like which one's the database. Like I don't know which one of these is a database. We have lots of different choices here. We can have different tools for all of these things. And if someone says like, I need a new database, which one do they want? Again, my answer, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the answer here is. And in some ways it doesn't matter what my answer is. Again, the point here is sort of the Frankenstein thing where like, it matters what we all mean. It matters sort of colloquially how we refer to a database. And so I don't know actually how we would refer to it here. Like different people made different things. Which leads us to the interactive part of this thing. We're going to vote. Taylor Swift says vote. Who thinks this is number 1? Nobody. Who thinks this is number 2? Like literally one person. 3, 2. Okay. Who thinks it's number 3? All right. Who thinks it's 4? Taylor Swift would be ashamed of all of you. Nobody here is voting. Who thinks it's 5? Oh, okay. And 6. Weird. Okay, I would have not have said 5. 5 sort of won by like a very low turnout vote. So somewhere between like 3, 4, and 5 seems to be kind of what the answer here is. But that's kind of the point. Is like we don't really know. If someone comes along and says, "Hey, we need a new database" or whatever, people could mean different things, or there could be a bunch of different tools that fit into these places. So that's one way to answer this question. Another way to think about this question, though, is like actually none of this may matter. That what a database means is not a set of features, but it's like an entire experience. That when we think about a database, we're actually thinking about a collection of things and not one specific thing. And so an example of that is if you think about what a TV is, if you're like a kid and you're like, hey, I want a new TV. Shout out Willy Wonka, and I don't know her name. She's like, I want a new TV right now. Okay, great. This is a TV. This is like a Samsung Smart TV. It has a bunch of apps and features and crazy stuff. And you can like browse the internet on it and watch Disney Plus and play games or whatever. This is probably a TV. The kid would be happy if you went out and bought this TV for him. Cool. This is also another TV. This is like a Samsung dumb TV. All it is a screen. It doesn't do anything. You just like plug cords into it and it'll show you whatever is being plugged into it. She probably would be like, cool, that's a TV too. Like the thing you want when you want a TV is mostly a giant screen and all these apps and bells and whistles are nice. But they're not really what we define as a TV. The TV is just a screen. Like this thing may be a TV. It's just a piece of nylon or whatever. I don't know what that is. And so TVs are basically just screens. However, if she's like, I want a new phone, and you go out and buy her this, she'll be like, nah, that's not really a phone. I don't want that. If you bought her this, she'd be like, what's wrong with you? And if she bought her this, she'd be like, that's from the 90s. And so none of these things are phones. And the reason they're not phones is because like Steve Jobs came along and was like an iPod, a camera, internet communicator, whatever he said. These are all one thing. A phone is all of these things. You can't have a phone without all of these things. A phone is not just an iPod. It's not just a thing to make cell calls with. It's not just a internet communicator, which I don't know why that's the word he used then, but whatever. You have to have all of it. And so a phone is all this stuff. And so this is a phone. A phone is one of these that has all these different features. And you can't have a phone anymore without having all these features, or like a phone like this now. And so the question is like, if this very weird kid came along and said, I'm going to do database, what is it she referring to? Like, is she referring to a collection of features or one specific thing? And she could be like, this is a database. This is, you can buy a like hosted Postgres. It's just Postgres. It's raw Postgres. It's the Postgres from the very first slide. Is this a database? Like maybe, but we may come to expect a database is actually something like this, where this is like snowflakes. They don't want to be called a database. They are a data cloud. It has all these different features. It's got like some data storage and some AI stuff and applications and security and various other things that look good on enterprise RFPs. And so a database is this. And so we may come to expect a database is a whole bunch of stuff. Or like, I don't know, for like the fairness doctrine, Databricks says the same thing. Basically, like databases are not just tables and you can query. It's this data intelligence platform. When they sell something, they sell this whole like iPhone worth of features. And Microsoft does the same with their One Lake Fabric collection of icons. So the question here then is, we're going to do this one more time. We have two different options here of like databases, as I said, of features, or databases as this kind of one overarching thing that has to do a bunch of different stuff, sort of like an iPhone. And so like we only have two choices here. Which one do folks think? Think one, that it is I don't know what it is, a few pieces of core functionality. What about an entire platform with lots of bells and whistles? Okay, it was a tie, 2-2. Outstanding engagement. So we don't know. I don't know. Like my answer to this is really, I don't know. I think like probably actually we're coming to expect number two here, that when people think of databases for the purpose of buying them and going out and like purchasing them from vendors, we're increasingly becoming like, we got to go out and buy something like Snowflake or Databricks that can do a bunch of AI craziness and those sorts of things. And if you show up with just like Postgres, your boss will be like, what is this? I need to do AI because my boss tells me that. So when I first like started thinking about this, of like, how do I answer this question? I kind of thought I'd have like a nice, clean answer. That was the hope. That's why you give these talks, I guess, is to say something smart. I ended up more like, this was kind of the whole vibe of me at the end of this. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the answer here is. I don't know what a database is. I wanted to be able to have a diagram like this. So this is like a diagram of the modern data stack. Look, data warehouse, this big thing. It's a bigger font in the middle. This is how we used to draw it. This was the diagrams that we drew even just a few years ago about the modern data stack, where the data warehouse was very clearly this thing in the middle. And now we have diagrams like the one from Tabular. We're like, where's the database in this thing? I don't know. It's very confusing. And I think that's like kind of the point, is this is where we are now, is the database itself is not even really a definable thing, that we've pulled it all apart. And so there's this like famous quote by this guy. His name is Jim Barksdale. He used to run like Netscape and AOL and various other internet things. And he basically said, there's only two ways to make money in business, and really in like sort of internet business. One is to bundle things and the other is to unbundle things. And so basically like we're in a big phase of unbundling the database. Like this diagram, I don't know where this is. We've taken the whole thing apart. We've turned it into the Lakehouse and into S3 files and to various icons. And so a database isn't a thing. Like it's not really a clear thing anymore. I think that's kind of the point. When you're out like shopping for them, if you're trying to sell to people who have databases, it's going to be very different how they actually define and think of what their database is. Some people may be referring to an S3 bucket. Some people may be referring to a metadata map. Some people may be referring to like S3 that computes things on top of, or EC2 that runs a bunch of compute on top of S3. Some people may be referring to Postgres. I don't know. The other kind of conclusion here, though, is the quote had two things, where it's like the only way to make money is unbundle and bundle, which also probably means at some point this is going to swing back to where we're bundling all this stuff together. And so probably like in 2025, some YC company is going to come along and be like, hey, look at this crazy thing that I built. I'm going to package all these things up into one complete platform that compiles queries and has a computer and has tables and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. A database now is like this torn apart thing that has lots of different features that nobody knows what it is. And in 2025, we may give this talk, and a database is the hot new YC startup. It's like Postgres on the blockchain. I don't know. I guess we're over that. Anyway, that's all I got. This is where various things are. I don't know. Are we doing questions? Melissa's gone. Yes, questions. All right, I'll stop there. Do I what? I don't answer questions? Oh, I don't know. Do anybody have? I don't know what to do here. Oh, I can ask questions. I tried that. Nobody answered them. Would anybody like to ask questions? Cool. All right. Oh, yes. So that's kind of interesting. So if I go back to this, so Mode, we sold this thing down here that says Vizcash. A lot of our customers, the end users would refer to Mode as their database. Like that was the thing they saw. They'd see charts and stuff like that, and they would like run queries in Mode or like do visualizations, and it would return results. And so they would send us support tickets, being like, "Why doesn't the database work?" Thinking that Mode was the database. And so I think like to folks who are kind of just on the far left of this, who are consuming all of it, it sort of doesn't matter. Like a lot of times those folks end up just interacting with whatever system's kind of the last mile of it. And that was what we very much experienced, where we would be a BI vendor that would get support tickets that were actually problems with BigQuery because people were interacting with it. It was all just stuff behind the scenes. And like that's to me kind of how any technology works, where if I use Facebook and it doesn't work, it's like Facebook is down, but like what is down? I don't know. Someone messed up the IP routing and they all have to saw through a cage. I don't know. But like none of that infrastructure really matters. It's just like the final piece that you interact with. And so I think for most people, when we would talk to them, it's like, in some ways, if they're worried about what the database is, that's a problem. They should just be worried about like the final piece they're interacting with, and the rest of it is someone else's job to sort out. Like if I'm having to debug what's wrong with Facebook, like I don't want to do that. Like it's just Facebook and someone else should go fix it. Kind of the same idea to me. That's probably not useful, but yes. Yeah, for sure. So you should be giving this talk. Yeah, you can certainly share them. I wouldn't recommend it. I think that this is maybe like interview advice generally, but when people like if I were to show up to somebody was to show up to Mode and have like an interview about this stuff, and we somehow brought up databases, the thing that I would kind of want people to ask is like, what are you referring to? Basically, like tell me what you've got set up and like what part are you talking to? Because if I just say the database doesn't work, or like can you describe something that's a question in reference to that, there are so many different things that could mean that I think I'd want someone who's like, okay, can you kind of explain to me how this works? I don't know. This is a very sort of similar example to the thing before, but if we asked like a question about the internet, that doesn't really mean anything. Like somebody would have to ask sort of like, okay, what specifically are you trying to talk about? What problem are you trying to solve? All that stuff generally is the kind of stuff that I think that is useful. But I really probably the thing to like teach is like Postgres. It's like nobody's going to dispute that Postgres is a database. If you understand basically how that works, all these other things are kind of like next steps that are easy enough to learn. If you try to teach this from the beginning, it's like, what in the world is going on? Yeah. Uh, I mean, it's the I don't know. It's enterprise middleware. Yeah. In circles, but like maybe gradually up, I would say. Like my guess is it does improve, but like it's not linear, you know? Yeah, but certainly there are things here that are probably somewhat steps back of like, we've added a ton of complexity it works for a handful of use cases, but for most of us, like Postgres, Mother Duck, big like DuckDB, small data. We're gonna hear about that later. That'll be what works. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Um, I think there certainly will be some bundling. Like I think the DuckDB Mother Duck in some cases is actually trying to rebundle some of this, where it's like you don't actually need all of this complexity for most use cases. What if we just give you a simple, easy to run thing? Like that's kind of a rebundling of it. The more interesting question I think is like the Databricks Snowflake things, where those are very platformy and like they may just be a collection of services that you get to choose from. I think they become sort of AWS-ish, where you have like a whole list of services you can choose. Does anybody bundle that? Like, my view is like probably don't come along and start a new Snowflake that's a bundled version of all this stuff. But you have a lot of these like weird services that sit over the top of it that start as, oh, we will be a managed service for you that actually packages all this stuff up together. There are a lot of startups, not necessarily all of them working, but a lot of startups that were like the modern data stack in a box, that we will take it and like package all these things up for you because this is a pain to manage. And so I think like there is some pull about, even if it's not strictly a product, like how as a user of this stuff, do I pay someone money and get one thing in return? That may not be one product, but it may be like, I have one service that manages all of it. So I don't know, like maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. I was trying to leave it the opinions to the people and nobody. Yeah, I'm being told to leave. Okay, that's it. Yes.